Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk from the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. Today is the 14th day of the first Adar Aleph 5776. It's been called February 23rd, 2016. Rabbi Richman here with Yitzchak Reuven, this week's Torah portion, Ki Tisa. And today, beginning with today, is, as we mentioned, the 14th day of the month of Adar Aleph. And that means that it is a special day. It's a day that we refer to as Purim Katan, mini Purim, little diminutive Purim, or what I might want to call a foreshadowing image of Purim, because as we've been discussing, this is the first month of Adar, but there are two Adars of joy and good tidings this year, because it is the leap year. And therefore, today is an unusual day because it is not really Purim at all, because the real Adar is next month. But of course, we have to be somewhere in time now. I mean, this Adar must count for something. And indeed, we don't say, for example, the special prayers in our daily prayers that are associated with Purim today, nor do we fulfill any of the commandments associated with Purim, such as listening to Megillat Esther, the Scroll of Esther, or doing the commandments of gifts to the poor, or the portions of food today, all the Purim activities, the Purim feast, because today's not Purim. However, we do not say the prayers that are associated with din, with judgment, and tachanun, if you know what I'm talking about. We don't say that today. So in other words, the fact that there is this confluence, this juxtaposition, this transparency of the 2 months over each other means that we are in a certain place. I wouldn't exactly call it a holding pattern. No, I would call it a forerunner, a foretaste. I would call it an exquisite glimpse, a foreshadow. That's perfect.
You used that word before.
Did I?
I think you came up with
so.
that. Yeah,
Am I that smart? I don't think so.
Yeah,
a foreshadowing of Purim. So it's in the air, and Yitzchak Reuven.
It's a teaser.
Yitzchak Reuven, my best friend, who took a bullet for me back in 1987 when we were both in the army together, first time. Yitzchak Reuven said, off mic, before we began this broadcast, he said to me in passing, in our conversation, because we talk about all sorts of things all the time, very serious, heavy-duty things, Yitzchak Reuven happened to say to me, you know what? Where we were talking about what we were going to be discussing on this program, he said, well, one thing's for sure, the world is in a lot deeper trouble this week than it was last week. And I was thinking about that, because everything that Yitzchak Reuven says is encrusted with deep meaning, virtue, with a deep significance. I was thinking about what he said, about how this week the world is in deeper trouble than it was last week, even though there's a ceasefire in Syria being declared today, which you don't really believe in, I see, and all sorts of stuff like that. But the fact is that I think the deep significance of what you're saying is, listen, what's Purim all about? As we'll have ample time to discuss when the real Purim rolls around, it's about the hidden presence of Hashem, how everything is part of an incredible master plan, how the tapestry of events that sometimes overtakes us and that makes us feel very overwrought and vulnerable because we don't detect Hashem's presence, just as we all know, the Scroll of Esther is the only book of the 24 books of the Bible in which God's name is not featured, because his presence was hidden, but he is part of everything. He was orchestrated everything. So too, Yitzchak Reuven, you look in the world today, and yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe things are worse this week than they were last week, but I can't get over the fact that this Purim Katan today, this foreshadowing of the shape of things to come, of the revelation of Purim, of the great love and compassion that God has for all of his creations, it's just, everything is just so right on schedule is what I'm trying to say, you know? Like, I'm not surprised that in some certain way of thinking, right, or way of looking at things, yeah, it's like everything just seems to be so mangled and just so much on some sort of demonic cruise control, you know, that everything seems to be out of our hands, and God's presence seems to be hidden as tyranny in many quarters rides roughshod over a lot of innocence, and there's all sorts of terrible manipulation and things going on. But I'm very encouraged by the fact that at the same time there are brilliant, breathtaking glimpses that are starting to last longer and longer of how Hashem is really bringing things together in our time. There's no coincidence. That's the main lesson of Purim. So let it also be the main lesson of today, of Purim Katan, of the minor Purim, of Adar Aleph. There are no coincidences, and everything is coming to a perfect boil, as it were.
A perfect boil. Question is, are you inside the pot or outside the pot? But of course, this week's Parashat, Rabbi, Parashat Ki Tisa, also has its dark moments and its moments of great light, does it not?
This week's Torah portion is so magnificent and contains the whole world. It is just so full of wisdom and yet so enigmatic and perplexing. And I think that it's a whole course of study to connect the ideas that we find in this Torah portion. And of course, the dark moments that you're alluding to are the fact that this Torah portion features the... Here we go again. I know we just looked it up again right before the show. Debacle. Pronounce it for me, will you?
Okay, I'm going to give you 3 pronunciations. The way I pronounce it, which I thought was one of the official pronunciations, but I don't find it now anywhere. Maybe someone can help me with it. I say Debacle. The American way of pronouncing it, according to everything we've seen online just recently, is Debacle.
Listen.
However, the British, I think, pronounce it Debac even, or maybe they say the L-E at the end. They say it's a French word in its origin, and they say Debac or Debac, but it's Debacle, or as I say, Debacle.
I actually
we
have
been
it right
going
here.
through this for years.
Here. Let's see if they're here. Here. I have it online. Here's the UK pronunciation.
Debacle.
Oh, no, someone said it without the L at the end.
Here's the US pronunciation.
Debacle.
The debacle of the golden calf
Debacle.
is a prominent topic in this week's Torah portion. It is a massive thing to understand. Why? What it really means. It's extremely misunderstood. Its connection to the tabernacle. Its connection to Moshe. What it really means for future generations. How it could happen, basically, 40 days after the total transfixing of the whole nation of Israel at Mount Sinai, when the heavens opened up and the unity of God was perceived in such a clear manner. 40 days later, they're making this golden calf. How is that exactly? What does that mean? But first, before we get to that, beginning at the beginning, okay? The Parsha opens up in Exodus chapter 30 and verse 11, of course, with the idea of the Machzit HaShekel, with the commandment of the half-shekel, right? Taking a census of all of the Israelites, the household members are counted by the half-shekel. And there's an idea in Torah that a blessing is only present on something that is hidden from the eye. We don't count people. We don't. You know what I'm talking about? This idea. We keep things kind of like under wraps, so that you're not supposed to count people. You're not supposed to count people. So a half coin is given for each person, and that tax, as it were, goes to the administration of the temple, the tabernacle, temple, and this half a shekel is used to purchase the tamid, daily offering, which is brought on behalf of the whole nation, and other purposes as well, general purposes in the holy temple, of other offerings. And to this day as well, there is a strong custom of the half-shekel donation. The Mishnah tells us that on Rosh Chodesh Adar, on the new moon of Adar, a special proclamation was made to prepare the nation, to remind them to get ready for every single person, rich and poor, they bring the same amount exactly, 1/2 shekel. And today this is done also as not only, as some people think, as a remembrance of the commandment, but as a preparation for the renewal of the commandment. And here in the land of Israel, especially in the Temple Institute, we've been very active in the renewal of this commandment. But Yitzchak, why 1/2 shekel? Why does every person bring only 1/2 shekel? The wealthy shall not increase and the destitute shall not decrease. It has to be exactly 1/2 shekel. And by the way, interestingly, this, we're told very, very specifically here in verse 15, that this 1/2 shekel donation to the temple is an atonement, and it's not a korban.
Mm-hmm.
But it serves as an atonement. Why 1/2?
Well, what I've always heard, Rabbi, from my teachers, and what seems to make sense to me, is that none of us are complete unto ourselves. We all need one another, and we all need a connection to Hashem. So the 1/2 shekel is emblematic and symbolizes our own incompleteness. But when we do make the contribution of the 1/2 shekel to the tabernacle or to the temple in order to pay for the public offerings, we become part of the whole. Then we are completed.
Very, very succinct, beautifully put definition. Exactly what I was looking for. This is something that's emphasized by the great sages, and specifically by the Hasidic masters. The idea that on the bottom line, if I would need to summarize it in a word, the 1/2 shekel contribution is an idea of unity, that we are incomplete without each other. One way of looking at it is that each person completes his fellow, and then the other way of looking at it is that Hashem himself is the completion. A person is only 1/2. And this whole topic is extrapolated and very intensely in many very beautiful traditions. But this is it on a really literally on the edge of the fork, as they say in Hebrew. The next topic that we encounter in the Parsha is the topic of the laver, the copper laver. And the commandment that Hashem said to Moshe, you shall make a copper laver and its base of copper for washing. Place it between the tent of meeting and the altar and put water there. From it Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands together with their feet. And you read the rest of those verses. This is the first vessel that the Kohanim encounter before commencing any of their sacred duties in the Holy Temple, in the Mishkan, and then in the Temple. They must sanctify their hands and feet from the water of the laver, the kior. And indeed, the Temple Institute, one of the very first vessels that we made many, many years ago, almost 30 years ago, or maybe even 30 years ago, was the original laver. But recently, within the past several years, we have created a large, technologically advanced, scientifically enhanced laver that is large enough to accommodate 12 Kohanim at once, which is the entire shift of Kohanim that are needed to bring the Tamid offering. And not only that, but this large copper laver features an internal computerized heating system so that the Kohanim, who after all are serving barefoot as per Torah law in the Holy Temple, do not have to be cold. And also, the amount of water released for each man is very, very exact and specific, and it's all computerized, so it's an amazing thing. But interestingly, this vessel, like many of the other vessels in the Holy Temple that are in the environs of the altar, right, in the Azarah, those that are in the proximity of the altar, its commandment is to be made out of copper. And the sages tell us that the very first copper laver that was made in the deserts under the direction of Bitzalel and Oliov, and that in commensurate to this mitzvah that Hashem first gave to Moshe, the very first copper laver that was created from a singular donation, it was the women of Israel who brought their mirrors, highly polished copper mirrors that they brought forward to Moshe and offered them as a contribution for this commandment. Moshe's first reaction was he was filled with disdain, and he thought that the women were absolutely
Out of place.
out of place. He thought it was maybe a nice idea, but he thought that they were absolutely to be reprimanded, and he thought that basically it was a breach of modesty. And the reason he thought it was a breach of modesty is because the mirrors are used to beautify. The women use the mirrors to beautify themselves. And so wherever there is an aspect of self and self-gratification, especially in this particular area of human endeavor, why that can't be completely pure, right? There's something there which it can be tainted by a certain degree of selfishness and the influence of the evil inclination. And Moshe's first reaction was, this is absolutely not sanua, not modest. And the Midrash tells us an amazing thing. The Midrash tells us that Hashem himself, God, chastised Moshe and said, actually, Moshe, you're wrong. Hashem reminded Moshe of the history. The history is that the Jewish men in Egypt, under Egyptian servitude, browbeaten, just plain beaten and browbeaten and crestfallen, were absolutely thrashed to within an inch of their lives by their taskmasters. They were working all day, and then at night the women would come out and meet them in the fields and bring them refreshments, bring them food and water. And the men who were basically, they had it really. The women made themselves beautiful and initiated relations with their husbands, and their motivation was completely for Hashem's sake, because they knew that they had a responsibility to the Jewish nation, and they knew that the plan of Pharaoh was working, God forbid. They knew the plan of Pharaoh was to totally decimate the people of Israel and destroy them, and that there wouldn't be any more. And so they felt that they had a holy obligation to bring children into the world, and they knew that they had to motivate their husbands and get them to want to be with them, even though it was the furthest thing from their mind, because they were so totally destroyed from this hard work. And Hashem said that they did was so beautiful and so highly motivated. This, by the way, is a very powerful example of an insight that Torah has about the sexuality of men and women as married couples, and how it is not something to be disdained, but how it is something that is a reflection of holy purpose when it's right between the right people and under the right circumstances. And so Hashem said, this is holy to me. And Hashem said to Moshe, no, you take those mirrors and you make them into the laver. So not only did God say, yes, this is a welcome and a most noble contribution, but think about it this way. Not only do those mirrors, which one might think, oh, that's like, no, that's a no-no, because that's that area of, like I call it human endeavor, the area of sexuality, which should be certainly left out of the Holy Temple. God said, no, I want those not only to be a temple vessel, but to be the laver by which the Kohanim, who bring forth all of Hashem's blessing into the world, who attend to the divine service, by which they sanctify themselves. The water in that vessel is going to make them holy. So that is just so eye-opening, as opposed to what many other people think about these things, what the Torah really is teaching us here about being normal and about being in this world and about being dedicated to each other with purity and holiness. So, bottom line, just as I said, the bottom line of the census and the half shekels about unity, I think the bottom line of this lesson that we just gave, if we can summarize it in a word, is basically how everything can be uplifted and how everything is a reflection, can be a reflection of Hashem in our lives.
Unity and purity, and what's around the corner?
Then we go on to the anointment oil. And the anointment oil is a very, very similar idea in that everything that's being created and has to be used in the Holy Temple needs to be anointed with this special oil that renders something sacred. And that also is as an aspect of elevating the physical. And talking about elevating the physical, right? The next concept that is listed in verse 34 of the Parsha is the incense offering. And the incense offering is, in a way, a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, because everybody knows that the sense of smell is something that, as the Talmud describes, it's like something that it's one of the physical senses. It's called one of the physical senses, but it's something that the soul derives benefit from. It's intangible, it's ethereal. And as the Zohar says, and as we know from our sages, the incense offering is considered by God to be the most beloved part of the temple service. And there are so many teachings associated with this, the idea being that the incense, because it was comprised of 11 ingredients, one of them having a very foul odor, the galbanum, which is a certain tree sap, when they are comprised in the secret method and amount that's known to one particular family, Beit Avtinas, of the priesthood, that is not shared with anyone else. When the incense is comprised, it produces the most beautiful fragrance. That also, getting back to the census, is representative of unity, because when the people of Israel and indeed the world are functioning together as a unit, instead of looking at these and saying, oh, they can't be in my club, oh, their deeds are terrible, they have a bad smell, when we are together, that's the most beautiful fragrance of all. So I think that there's a certain kind of idea and theme that's being developed as the Parsha continues, and now we come to Bitzalel and Oliav, and how the verses again emphasize that they have this heart, and they have a wise heart. And then we come to Shabbat, which is a cornerstone of everything, knowing that Hashem is continually creating the world. And then we come to the golden calf. When we come back to Temple Talk after this break, we are in a quandary. We have to try to understand, what is this all about? What are the ramifications of the golden calf for our generation as well? Stay with us. We'll be right back. Temple Talk.
Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven, and with me, Rabbi Richman, in our studio here in Jerusalem, Israel, Temple Institute. Today is the 14th day of Adar Rishon, the first Adar, 5776, otherwise known as Purim Katan, because this is the day of Purim, but it won't be till next month, and it's also February 23rd, 2016, and, it's very sweet and appropriate that Parashat Ki Tisa comes this week, and that we're discussing it today on Purim Katan, because for example, the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, is referred to as a masecha. It's
right. Egel masecha, which means literally, you know what? It's like the word nisuchim and
right.
nisuch hayayin, which is to pour. It's molten, but in modern Hebrew, the same word masecha for molten
is a mask.
And then, so it's called an egel masecha.
And then Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses at the end of the parsha, when he returns from Mount Sinai the second time, his skin, his face is makreen, is radiating a brilliant light, and in order for the people to be able to get close to him, he needs to put on a masveh, which is sort of a veil, but it's also a type of a masecha, so he needs to hide some part of his essence at this point in order
so there's a lot that's hidden
to be
here.
in their proximity. again, the big question, and I think a big misunderstanding, is what is the Egel HaZahav and what's it all about, the golden calf, and what was Aron's part in it, and why would Aron, agree even passively to such a thing? And where did this come? I mean, we read about the commandment to make the tabernacle last week, because God told Moses up in Mount Sinai, but Moses still hasn't had a chance yet to relate that to the people. And then all of a sudden there's the golden calf, and then that error, chet, that miscue, needs to be corrected and rectified and atoned for.
So, like you said, he's on Mount Sinai all this time, right?
40 days and 40 nights.
And like 40 days after the first day, which is when the heavens opened, which is when the children of Israel heard Hashem's voice, that's when they had this horrible, like you just called it, a miscue. But yet, people might be wondering, why are we referring it to so lightly, like as a miscue? And that's because it actually was not rank, vile idolatry. It actually was a different kind of mistake. So we'll discuss that. But so Moshe's on the mountain all this time. And that of course explains what seems to be the redundancy of Parashat Vayakel, which begins in chapter 35 of the book of Exodus, where Moshe assembled the entire assembly of the children of Israel and said to them, these are the things that Hashem commanded to do them. And he begins to talk to them about Shabbat, and then the contributions for the tabernacle, and then all of the work that has to be done, because he hadn't told them yet. Because when we learned about the details of these beautiful commandments in Parashat Truma and Tetzaveh, about the details of the tabernacle, this is Hashem saying it over to Moshe. Moshe hasn't yet said it over to the people.
And then I think also emphasizes how dear this was to Hashem, that the Torah records it twice, the direct transmission from Hashem to Moses, and then afterwards Moses tells the people, and also it emphasizes and makes clear that this was a work order that he received, and now
right.
He had to hire a foreman, that was B'Tzalel, and an assistant foreman, that was Oholiav, and he had to organize the people, and people had to be given their assignments. It was a real national project that had to be done.
Right.
Nuts and bolts, everything had to be accounted for.
Now, part of the enigma, I won't call it a mystery, but I will call it an enigma, is the relationship between the tabernacle and the golden calf. Because, first of all, again, there's no chronological order in the Torah. We've said that so many times. It's a major principle in Torah thought that since the Torah is not a history book, it doesn't necessarily have to present things in a historical continuum, because Hashem places things where He wants them for the emphasis that He wants. Which is a completely different mindset than people have when they read something. So the idea is, when did this take place exactly? And the sages say, they quip that Hashem said, as it were, let the gold of the tabernacle come and atone for the gold of the sin of the golden calf. In other words, there seems to be a causative, reactive relationship between the erection of the tabernacle making up for or correcting a mistake of the golden calf. But does that really make sense to you, Yitzchak? Because the fact is, God was going to command this anyway. I mean, Exodus 25:8, where Hashem is saying to Moshe on Mount Sinai, before the sin of the golden calf happened,
right.
And they shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. And as we've been teaching so obsessively for 3 decades, of course, and certainly this year on these Parshiot, this is the whole focal point of history. Everything's been leading to this. This is what Jewish existence is all about. This is the Torah's mandate to build a place for Hashem in this world. So therefore, what does it have to do with the tabernacle? He would have commanded it anyway, right?
So
you hear
I
what
would
I'm
make
saying?
a proposal.
So what I wanted to explore, one of the facets that I want to explore this week in our video lesson, is what exactly is the deep relationship between the tabernacle and the golden calf, and how does Moshe fit in? But in any event, there is something there that whatever it is that they miscued, Hashem says, now I want you to get it right with the concept of the tabernacle. But what was the golden calf, and what was that all about? And as you foreshadowed, did Aron, the high priest of God, the anointed Kohen, did he acquiesce to this? Did he go along with it, telling them to give him their gold, and he's going to make the golden calf? And what is this really? Whose idea was it anyway? And why did Hashem? Why was he satisfied with there were a small amount of people that were killed directly, and then it was business as usual. And as we've taught many times, the sin of the spies speaking ill against the land of Israel is even worse in God's eyes than this. So if this was a personal affront to God, if they were actually umpying, bowing down to this cow, why did God take it in stride? But that isn't what it was. It wasn't real idolatry.
I'd like to make a very bold proposal, okay? And you have my permission, Rabbi, to tear it apart, to tear it down. Don't worry about my part. I'm just throwing this out here. It's a thought that there's two reasons why it may appear in the chronology that it does in the Torah, and that is why God set it up this way. Because God, yes, from the start, God wanted the tabernacle. But by allowing, so to speak, the debacle of the golden calf to take place in between the transmission of the mitzvot of the tabernacle to Moses, and then in between the actual building of the tabernacle, or the transmission of the mitzvot from Moshe to the people of Israel, is first of all, there's an idea that we have that the medicine or the cure precedes the illness, and that Torah teaches us that the tabernacle preceded the illness, so to speak, of the golden calf, and that it was already there in order to mechaper on the golden calf.
It was there where? You mean in
it was
theory,
there.
because
It was
the mitzvah
spoken.
had
It was
been
a spoken
taught.
commandment
Okay.
that wasn't put
But it
into
hadn't
action
been
yet.
erected yet.
Okay, I'm just throwing that out there. Second idea is that Aron, he's going to be the high priest, and we even know about that. We learned about that already, that he's going to be the high priest, and we learned exactly how Moses is instructed to dedicate him as the high priest, etc., etc. And if he had stood aloof from the people and said, I'm out of here, I'm not going to have anything to do with this, when the crowd came upon him, right, then where would his street cred have been? Like, how could he lead the people in atonement in the tabernacle if he, wouldn't get dirty with them when things went bad? Aron, he takes a fall, and that gives him the credibility to be able to stand before Hashem in the tabernacle alongside Israel and perform his duties.
I think both points that you made are excellent, and I could even spin it a little bit in more simple terms. The distillation of the first concept being, ultimately, this was a test. Hashem gave this to the people as a test, right? As far as Aron is concerned, he had the best interest of the people in mind. He wanted to forestall this as best as possible. Let's look at the verses beginning in chapter 32, where it says the people saw that Moshe had delayed in descending the mountain. The Hebrew here is laden with so much meaning, because it says Vayar Ha'am, right? And that is a reference, Ha'am, just as it is, the people, is a reference to the Erev Rav, to the mixed multitude. And they have been a thorn in the side of the Israelites throughout this journey and ever since. And they are instigating this subordination. And they saw that he had delayed. And there's a whole interesting exegesis that the sages make on this word, Ki Boshesh Moshe, that he had delayed. This contains the word Beshesh, which means in the sixth, because there's a whole idea that he was supposed to come in the sixth hour at a certain time on a certain day, and they made a mistake in their calculations, and they thought that he was late. And so they went into this tremendous panic, and they gathered around Aron, and they said, "Rise up, make for us gods that will go before us. For this man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what became of him." So first of all, the word Elohim here, Aseh Lanu Elohim, according to all of the sages, doesn't even refer to God, because the same word the Torah uses to refer to judges,
Right.
to earthly judges who convey and demonstrates the midah, the attribute of justice, right? So the word here is chol. It refers to judges. So basically, they're saying, make us some leaders, make us something to lead us. And so that's the first giveaway, that they're not even talking about thinking that this thing that they create is going to be Hashem.
Right.
So they're saying, we need a pacifier. We need a fix. We need something to be able to hold on to. We need a politician. We need someone who's going to stroke us. I don't know what exactly. Someone who's going to make us in our comfort zone, because we need someone, right? Because this person, Moshe, that took us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. So they never said, even after being instigated by the Erev, they never said, "Oh, we don't believe in Hashem anymore. Oh, let's party." They said, we need someone to replace Moshe. So the more we understand, look at these verses, the more we understand, this is a very specific thing, as strange as it appears. This is not about Hashem here at all. It's not about overturning Hashem. So, and that explains Aron's role, because Aron was certainly not about to do something which would counter Hashem's sovereignty. So then Aron says to them, "Okay, go get the gold from your wives and daughters and bring it to me," thinking the whole time, well, the women are certainly not going to do that very quickly, because women don't want to give up their jewelry. So I should be able to buy myself.
Alternatively, as we pointed out before,
they wouldn't do it at all.
Lavers, they wouldn't do it at all.
Exactly.
They're
So
above
he figured I have got to get myself some time here.
Right. He's trying to buy time.
And he was so
consistently,
right.
Yeah.
The women absolutely refused to have anything to do with this whole thing. But the men, they said no problem, and they gave them their earrings.
Right.
And that's all I'll say about that. But apparently they were all wearing earrings, so they gave them their own earrings. No waiting. And they gave it to Aron, and Aron mixed it all up, and according to our sages, this egel masecha, this molten egel, this molten cow, came out of its own. I want you to know, I could spend 2,000 years just thinking, teaching, talking about what that means, that it came out on its own. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that we make gods according to what's inside of us, according to what we imagine, according to our own needs, on our terms, as opposed to people that say, I want to get close to Hashem? The biggest mistake that they made here was saying, we want Hashem to be close to us. In other words, without doing the work, right? Mm-hmm. And so Aron says to them, Eila Elohecha Yisrael asher halilucha me'eretz Mitzrayim. These are your gods, Israel, who took you out of the land of Egypt. Do you think for a minute that Aron was saying that this is Hashem, or that this is who took you out of Egypt? Again, this is about leadership. As strange as that sounds, like what does that have to do with, what does an image of a cow have to do with Moshe? That's another story. But the point is, he's not saying this is Hashem. He's saying, again, the word Elohecha, meaning your leadership. It's a word that is not always connoting godliness in the Torah, right? And the proof that Aron is not talking about idolatry or Hashem here at all is that he says, Bill, tomorrow will be a festival for Hashem, not for this cow, for Hashem, around this monument. But the thing is, again, Aron is stalling for time, hoping that by tomorrow Moshe will definitely be down here and he'll straighten all this out. So he said, a festival for Hashem tomorrow. But here's this idea that for whatever reason that they chose this image, or that this image chose them, that this is the image that was produced. And I don't want to wax mystical here, although there are so many deep esoterical Kabbalistic explanations for all of this significance and what it means and what it's rooted in. And I'm not going there. That's not our mandate so much. Looking at it on a purely psychological level and on a simpler level is what interests me at this point. And again, what is it that they were looking for, Yitzchak? What were they looking for? And I mean, I could see in a statement like, make us something, hey man, like make us a god, because the man Moshe who took us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. I could see in that a revelation of a terrible vulnerability of their dependence on Moshe that was the root of the whole problem. Just as today, how many people say to us, what rabbis tell you that you can do this? What rabbis are on your side? What leaders of the generation tell you that it's okay to go to the Temple Mount? What leaders of the generation tell you could make these things? As opposed to starting the conversation by saying, well, what does the Torah tell us? What does the Torah tell us? So there is a certain maybe over-dependence on Moshe here, or maybe a misunderstanding of what Moshe is to the Jewish people, what the relationship really is all about. And I think that their perception of Moshe and their relationship with him was severely damaged, and that has something to do with the fact that after all of this is concluded, Moshe can no longer be seen under normal circumstances when he's not teaching them. He has to cover his face. One standard explanation of that is because they fell in their spiritual level. They plummeted because of the debacle of the golden calf. They no longer merited to be able to see him. But I think a simpler explanation is the fact that they just really did not understand what this man is all about. Anyway, the point is, the common perception in the world of illustrated Bible stories for children is that this was some kind of idolatrous festival. And that's not really what the Torah is teaching here.
Right, and it reflected a very, very primitive, dim mentality on Israel's part. That in spite of everything they had gone through, the God's promise from Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov and Egypt, and all the signs and wonders and leaving Egypt, etc., at Mount Sinai, that despite all of that, they still, you take Moses away for a month and a half, and boy, they're clueless, they're lost, they're just back to, not even back to where they were before. They're like, so the idea that they were creating a God for themselves would tell us that they're just like really, really, really dim people, and that doesn't fit in with everything else we learn about Israel in the desert. It's, in spite of their many difficulties and ups and downs that they had, they were a brilliant and enlightened generation. So something there just doesn't work.
Something hadn't taken root yet. There was a certain myopic attitude here. There was something that wasn't working for them yet. It was too obscure, the idea of who Hashem really is and what Moshe's role is. It was still too complex. They heard it, but it was too complex. So there's a dynamic here. The dynamic needs to be explored much deeper. The dynamic between Moshe and the gold of the golden calf, the gold of the tabernacle, Moshe and the tabernacle and the golden calf, cause and effect, and what it all means. And we're going to explore it more deeply in our video lesson this week. For now, I also want to mention another concept. And you remember that recently, I think it was around Parashat Bereshit of this year, we talked about Moshe breaking the luchot, breaking the tablets, and what that meant, and how that also worked on such a deep level, because he knew that the people were not yet ready for the first tablets, which would have been a completely different level of Torah knowledge, Torah acquisition, and relationship with Hashem. But by smashing that and having to go and get the second tablets, a different kind of situation arose in which it became much more difficult to master a true understanding, knowledge, and acquisition of Torah, but it was much more lasting. And he knew that. He knew that the whole thing changed because of this episode. He saw that the whole infrastructure was changing. And so the bottom line is, Moshe says to the people, "You've committed a grievous sin, and I'm going to ascend to Hashem." And that's when Moshe says, he shows this incredible selflessness, this incredible sense of self-sacrifice, identity, duty, total nullification of himself to his people, where he says, "If you would but forgive their sin, and if not, erase me now from your book that you have written," which is, I think, one of the most incredible statements that any human being has ever said in the history of the world, that he said that. So there's just, it goes on and on. There's so much here. There's the attributes of forgiveness that are included in this parsha, the 13 attributes of mercy that God taught Moshe to apply, to approach, to convey,
don't know what you're trying to say. Convey.
That God taught Moses under circumstances like this to invoke the 13 attributes of mercy, which is still the core of our prayer service on at times of special supplication. There's so much here, and there's no question about the fact that it changed the shape of things and the shape of things to come as well. And this is one of the things that our sages tell us we still suffer from. It still has repercussions, reverberations, ricochets throughout time, this sin. But again, not so much as, and this is hard to hear because it's not an easy concept, not so much as representative of a terrible form of idolatry, but as representative of a terrible mistake that we made psychologically in our dependence on Moshe and our dependence on a certain way of relating to Hashem. I want to say one more thing, Yitzchak, in case we don't have time. It's so important. There's another midrash that the sages emphasize that when Moshe first came down from Mount Sinai and he gave over the commandment of the Tabernacle, the people said, we believe in God, but we don't believe he's going to rest his presence here in this thing. And I think the sages tell us that to emphasize to us that there are going to be people like that in every generation. But we have to know that indeed Hashem commands us to make a place for his presence in this world, and we should take it seriously.
And that's it for this week. Thanks for being with us. Temple Talk.